My son's mother-in-law looked around my dining room and said this house is perfect for a young couple, hinting that I should hand it over. So I smiled and replied, then why aren't they moving into yours? This house is perfect for a young couple, Marjorie Hale said, turning slowly in her chair, as if she were surveying a property she intended to purchase. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't smile apologetically. She didn't ask. I set my fork down beside my plate. Then why aren't they moving into yours? I asked. The silence that followed was clean and immediate. Callum stared at his plate. Bryn inhaled sharply. Marjorie's expression tightened only slightly, the way someone adjusts to unexpected resistance but does not retreat. "Oh, Leora," she said lightly, folding her hands on the table. "My townhouse is small. You've seen it. 2 bedrooms, no real yard, and the traffic noise from Henderson Road never stops. This place is different. It's quiet. It has space. You're not even using all of it." There, it was not a request, an evaluation. I looked around my own dining room, the framed photographs, the oak sideboard, the windows facing the Blue Ridge foothills. I had cooked the meal myself, set the table myself. I had even remembered Bryn's preference for sparkling water over still, and somehow, somewhere between the first course and dessert, my house had become an available asset. Callum cleared his throat but said nothing. Not a denial, not a defense, just silence. Young couples need a head start. Marjorie continued, as though explaining something obvious to a child. It would ease so much pressure for them. I felt the shift. Then this was not spontaneous. This was rehearsed. The phrasing too smooth, the reasoning too layered. They had discussed this before tonight. They had waited, perhaps even assumed I would agree. This home didn't fall from the sky, I said evenly. We built toward it. Marjorie tilted her head. And now you're comfortable. You could afford to be generous. I can help with a plan, I replied. I won't hand over the finish line. Bryn's chair scraped softly against the floor. Callum's shoulders seemed to fold inward, as though he wished the wood beneath him would open and swallow the conversation whole. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The claim had already been made. As I gathered the plates a few minutes later, listening to their muted whispers on the porch, I understood something with quiet clarity. This hadn't been dinner. It had been an assessment of what they believed they were entitled to take. They came back inside as if nothing permanent had been said, but the air had changed. I didn't sit down again. I stood near the counter, hands resting against the cool stone, and let the quiet stretch until someone had to fill it. You make it sound like we're asking for something outrageous, Bryn said carefully. I looked at her, then at Callum. You're asking to move backward through my life. Marjorie exhaled, already impatient. No one is trying to erase your effort, Leora. That's exactly what you're doing, I replied, though my voice remained steady. I did not give them a long history lesson. I didn't need to. I kept it simple. We started in a 1-bedroom rental, I said. Your father and I peeling cabinets, windows that rattled when trucks passed. We saved until we could buy a small condo. Nothing impressive, just ours. Callum shifted in his chair. After that, we bought an older house that needed work. We did it room by room, paid down debt before we upgraded anything. 24 years later, we moved into this place not because someone handed it to us, because we climbed toward it. I met my son's eyes. We started where you are. We didn't start where I am. Callum rubbed his hands together. Mom, it would only be temporary. Temporary. The word hung there, undefined and convenient. Temporary until when? Until the next raise, until another refinance, until habits changed on their own. Temporary has no expiration date. I said it just becomes normal. Marjorie's posture stiffened. You're making this about principle. It is about principle. Callum leaned forward. You always said you'd help if I needed it. I will help you build, I answered. I will not finance irresponsibility. The sentence settled heavier than I intended. Bryn's expression hardened. Marjorie's lips pressed thin. Callum said nothing else. The evening ended without raised voices. They gathered their coats. Marjorie offered a polite goodbye that did not reach her eyes. Bryn avoided mine entirely. Callum paused at the door as though considering something, then followed them out. When the car pulled away, I stood in the hallway and listened to the house return to stillness. If they were only asking for space, I thought, why did it feel like they had already measured where my furniture would go? And the next answer came in the mail 3 weeks later. 3 weeks passed without another mention of my house. Callum's calls grew shorter. Text messages replaced visits. When I asked how work was going, he answered in generalities. When I asked about the townhouse he and Bryn had purchased 2 years earlier, he said, "It's fine." The words sounded rehearsed. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, wedged between utility flyers and a gardening catalog. It was addressed to Callum Vance, but beneath his name was my address labeled as secondary contact. I frowned, trying to remember why my information would still be attached to anything of his. Then I did remember years ago when he was 23 and determined to prove himself creditworthy. I had co-signed a modest car loan. He refinanced eventually. I assumed my name had been removed from every related account. Apparently it had not. I opened the envelope carefully. Delinquency notice, mortgage pass, due second credit line at maximum limit. The language was clinical, the numbers were not. I read the pages twice before sitting down. When I called, he answered on the fourth ring. Mom. I received a letter today. Silence. Then a slow exhale. I meant to tell you. Tell me what it's not as bad as it looks. I waited. The mortgage rate adjusted, he said. It jumped more than we expected. We've been juggling it. Juggling what exactly? He hesitated, and in that pause I heard more truth than in his words. Credit cards, he admitted. Some furnishings. We needed to make the place feel right. And the SUV lease Bryn's commute is unaffordable. I finished. It's temporary. That word again. How many months past due, I asked. 2. And the credit line maxed. And you thought moving into my house would solve this? It would give us breathing room, he said quickly. Just until we stabilize. The numbers in front of me told a different story. This wasn't about being young and overwhelmed. This was about choosing a lifestyle that outpaced income and expecting someone else to absorb the difference. You're not starting out, I said quietly. You're overspending. That's not fair. It's accurate. He fell silent. I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope. The dinner conversation replayed itself in my mind, but the meaning had shifted. Marjorie's insistence, Bryn's defensiveness, Callum's careful use of temporary. They weren't asking for opportunity. They were asking for escape. I think we need to talk in person, I said finally. He didn't argue this time. When I ended the call, the house felt unchanged, but something inside it had settled into clarity. This was no longer about space. It was about consequence. And the next time we sat at my table, the numbers would be there with us. I invited them over the following Sunday. No special meal, no polished table, just coffee, and the envelope placed neatly in front of my seat. Callum arrived first, Bryn beside him. Marjorie came 10 minutes later carrying the same composed expression she had worn the night she assessed my living room. We sat down. I slid the papers across the table toward Callum. I received these, I said. He didn't open them. He didn't need to. Bryn reached for the stack instead. Her eyes moved quickly over the figures. Then she pushed the pages back as though proximity made them worse. Everyone our age lives this way, she said. Mortgages adjust, credit fluctuates. It's normal. 2 months past due is not fluctuation, I replied. Marjorie leaned forward. They just need stability. That's all we've been saying. If they weren't drowning in payments, they could reset. Stability, I repeated. Doesn't come from someone else's deed. The words settled between us. Callum ran a hand over his face. Mom, we're not asking you to give it away forever. You're asking me to absorb your consequences. Bryn's voice sharpened. We're asking for support. I turned to Marjorie. If you believe in this so strongly, transfer your townhouse to them. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Marjorie's composure slipped just slightly. That's different. No, I said, it's not. Her jaw tightened. My townhouse is my retirement security, and this house is mine, I answered. Built over decades, paid for, secured. Callum pushed back from the table. You're making this bigger than it is. I'm making it accurate. He looked between us, frustration rising. Is there no way you can just help? I studied him carefully. Not the boy who used to wait for permission to cross the street, but the man who had signed documents he couldn't sustain. I will help you rebuild, I said. I won't help you avoid. Bryn's eyes flashed. Marjorie folded her hands tightly in her lap. Callum stared down at the numbers he hadn't dared to examine earlier. No one shouted, no one stormed out. But something shifted definitively. They had expected negotiation. They found refusal. When they left, I watched through the window as the three of them stood near their car, speaking in low, urgent tones. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the posture of people recalculating. 2 months after our conversation, I saw the listing. It appeared while I was reviewing market reports online, a small thumbnail of their townhouse tucked among other properties in the same neighborhood. I clicked without hesitation, reduced price-motivated sellers. The photographs were staged carefully. Neutral tones, minimal clutter, no hint of urgency, but the price told the real story. A text arrived later that evening. "We're downsizing," Callum wrote. I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone down. Downsizing implied choice. This was not choice. This was arithmetic. They sold within 3 weeks. Public records confirmed what the listing did not advertise. They accepted an offer below their remaining balance. Closing costs absorbed what little equity remained. What they had built over 2 years dissolved in a signature. Then came the next shift. They moved in with Marjorie. She announced it with a photograph online. Bryn smiling beside her mother, Callum carrying a box of caption beneath the image. "Family comes first." I didn't comment. I didn't react. I watched. At first it looked manageable. Marjorie's townhouse was tidy and efficient. 2 bedrooms, 1 converted office, limited storage, limited parking. Within weeks, the tone of the updates changed. Callum's SUV filled half the driveway, forcing Marjorie to park on the street. Bryn rearranged furniture to optimize space. Boxes lingered in the hallway. A second desk appeared in the dining area. Neighbors began posting about overnight street parking violations. I heard about the noise complaints through a mutual acquaintance. Raised voices late in the evening, doors closing harder than necessary. Utilities spiked. Marjorie mentioned it casually in a comment thread, half joking about adjusting to more activity. The humor didn't last. Bryn had not secured new work yet. Callum was between contracts. Rent was not exchanged, only reassurances. Marjorie had imagined a short stay, a stepping stone, a supportive pause before the next upward move. She had not accounted for duration. I recognized the pattern immediately. Temporary arrangements have a way of stretching when nothing forces them to end. Space shrinks. Patience erodes. Resentment grows quietly before it announces itself. 3 months after they moved in, my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. I looked at the screen before answering, already aware that the conversation waiting on the other end would not resemble the confident proposals I had heard at my own dinner table. 3 months after they moved into Marjorie's townhouse, she called. Her voice was different, not polished, not measured, thinner. "Leora," she began, skipping pleasantries. "They won't leave." I didn't interrupt. "I told them this was temporary," she continued. "We agreed on 3 months. It's been 3.5. I could hear something in the background, a television maybe, or a door closing harder than necessary. "What's changed?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, and then corrected herself. "That's the problem." Bryn had refused every smaller rental they'd shown her. Too cramped, wrong neighborhood, not the standard they were used to. Callum was between contracts again, income, unpredictable, applications incomplete. "The creditors are still calling," Marjorie admitted. "About the balance from the townhouse. I didn't realize that would follow them like this. Debt doesn't evaporate when you change addresses. It only relocates." "I consulted an attorney," she said after a pause, "about eviction." The word hung between us. I never imagined I would have to consider that with my own daughter. I folded my hands on the table in front of me. "What did the attorney say?" "That if they're not paying rent and there's no written agreement, I can serve notice, but it will be unpleasant." I thought about the photograph she had posted months earlier. "Family comes first." "I thought they just needed time," she said quietly. "A reset." "Stability. Time doesn't correct habits," I replied. "It exposes them." She exhaled, slow and unsteady. I should have listened. There was no triumph in hearing that, only recognition. "I'm glad you see it now," I said. Silence settled on the line, but it felt different from the silences before. Less defensive, more reflective. "They've stopped looking seriously," she added. "They assume I won't push." "And will you?" Another pause. This one firmer. "Yes." When we ended the call, I sat for a moment longer, considering how easily generosity becomes obligation when boundaries are blurred. Marjorie had offered refuge, believing it would create gratitude. Instead, it had created residence. Callum came by on a Wednesday afternoon. He didn't text first. He didn't ask if I was home. I saw his car pull into the driveway and watched him sit behind the wheel for a full minute before stepping out. When I opened the door, he looked tired. Not angry, not defensive, just worn down. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No paperwork this time. No envelopes, just space between us. "I heard you spoke to Marjorie," he began. "I did." He nodded. "She's serious about asking us to leave." "Yes." He rubbed his palms together slowly. "I thought it would be easier. Easier for who I asked." He looked down at the table. For everyone I didn't respond. For me, he corrected. For Bryn. We thought if we could just lower the pressure for a while, things would balance out by transferring it. I said to someone else. He didn't argue. I felt like we were falling behind, he admitted. Friends are buying bigger homes, new cars, posting promotions. It felt like we had to keep pace. At what cost? He swallowed. I assumed if something went wrong, you'd help. There it was. Not entitlement shouted across a dinner table, just expectation quietly formed over years. I've always helped, I said evenly. I know, but help isn't the same as rescue. He nodded again. I raised you to build upward. I continued. Not sideways. He closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing the weight of that. No one forced you to sign those loans, I said. No one forced you to furnish beyond your income. I know. And no one forced you to stay silent at my table. That landed. He looked at me then directly. I didn't want to make it worse. For whom he didn't answer. After a moment, he asked the question I had expected. Is there a way back? There's always a way back to responsibility, I said. His shoulders eased slightly, though not in relief, more in recognition. It won't be comfortable, I added. It won't be immediate, and it won't involve my house. He sat quietly considering. When he left, he didn't ask for money. He didn't propose another arrangement. He simply said, I'll call you. 3 days later, Marjorie sent formal notice, and this time Callum did not argue. The week after Marjorie served notice, I met with my attorney. I didn't go in angry. I went in organized. We reviewed my estate documents line by line. The house, which had once been listed simply as my primary asset, was transferred into a trust. Clear terms, no ambiguity, no early distribution, no informal arrangements. If Callum were to inherit one day, it would be under conditions. Completion of certified financial counseling, proof of sustained solvency, no outstanding judgments, no co-signed obligations tied to my name. I want this documented, I said, not implied. My attorney nodded. Structure prevents misunderstanding. Exactly. I removed my name from every remaining financial link connected to Callum, the old car loan notation, secondary contact permissions, automatic notifications, clean separation. When Callum called to tell me he had enrolled in debt counseling, his voice sounded steadier than it had in months. It's not optional anymore, he said. We're meeting with someone twice a week. And Bryn? He hesitated. She thinks it's excessive. That will pass, I said. Reality tends to outlast pride. Marjorie moved forward with the eviction timeline. The process was formal, deliberate, uncomfortable. There were raised voices, late-night arguments, neighbors who noticed tension through thin walls. I heard about it indirectly, never from Callum, never from Bryn. I stayed out of it. I kept my routines. Morning coffee on the back porch, a few hours in the garden, trimming back overgrowth, Thursday book club at the library. I refused to let their instability dictate my rhythm. Ownership feels different when it's reinforced by structure rather than assumption. For the first time since that dinner, my house felt fully settled again. Not because the conflict had disappeared, but because the lines were clear. Marjorie called once more to confirm the final date. 30 days, no extensions. Callum didn't ask me to intervene. One evening after updating the final trust documents, I stood in the quiet of my living room and realized something had shifted permanently. Forgiveness is personal. Structure is protective. And the difference between the two would shape whatever came next. 6 months later, the urgency had faded into routine. Callum rented a modest apartment across town, 2 bedrooms, neutral carpet, functional appliances. He bought used furniture from estate sales and online listings. Nothing matched, but everything was paid for. The SUV was gone. He drove a smaller sedan, now owned, not leased. The first time he mentioned that every bill had cleared on time for 3 consecutive months, he didn't frame it as an achievement. He stated it plainly, like someone reporting progress rather than asking for praise. I didn't realize how much the minimum payments were costing us, he said during one of his visits. It wasn't just money, it was pressure. Bryn had taken part-time work. Not glamorous. Not what she had once imagined for herself, but steady contributing. They argued less, he admitted. Not because everything was resolved, but because fewer illusions were left to defend. Marjorie finalized her separation from their household. No public announcements this time, no captions about family, just a quiet return to her own space. Callum visited me alone now. He no longer scanned my living room the way he had the night Marjorie evaluated it. He didn't ask about square footage. He asked about my garden, about the book I was reading, about whether I needed help replacing the porch light. Our conversations were quieter, more measured, not sentimental, just steady. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no apologies delivered in theatrical language. What existed instead was recalibration. I remained in my home, 3 bedrooms, paid off, earned over decades of work restraint and progression. I could have given them comfort. I chose to give them consequence. And consequence in time gave them something sturdier than comfort. Ever could stability built from within, not borrowed from someone else's deed. One evening, after Callum left, I walked through each room before turning off the kitchen light. The floors were still the air unclaimed by expectation. This house was not inherited, not borrowed, not negotiated. It was built toward, and it remained entirely mine.